Okay, hi brothers and sisters. Tonight we're going to do a video concerning, well, a whole bunch of topics. But as I go, what I want to do is try to explain all the little connections that I usually don't take the time to explain in full because it's found in other videos. And so I typically won't take the time to explain out every little detail when I hit it. And so maybe this time I'll slow down in the video, so I expect it to be a fairly long video. And maybe over the course of the video you can piece it together. You can maybe go back and rewatch parts and then understand why the ideas flow the way that they do. And so we're going to pick up our first passage in Jeremiah. And this is about the hammer of the Lord. I mean, if we think our globe, our world is shaking now, you know, we really need to pay attention to the hammer of the Lord and what it's responsible for doing in the Bible. And you'll get hammer in a positive way, and you'll get it in a negative way. And the positive way is found, like I said, we'll begin in Jeremiah 23. Now this is a passage that we've actually used, and it just X'd out my passage. Unbelievable. I must have hit it. Sorry. I thought I maybe had it up here twice. Okay, sorry about that, folks. It was my own stupidity that did that, which it is most of the time. So, alright, sorry about that. Jeremiah 23, parallel. Okay. So, 23, it was verse 29. Now this is a chapter, it's so important to understand so much in this chapter that has connected to, in part, to so many of my other videos. So 29 is the verse we're going to look at concerning the hammer of the Lord. And it says, "Is not my word like fire?" Now, fire, what's fire? Fire burns, doesn't it? When it hits us, it really burns. And so we're seeing an allegory here already to God's word as fire. We know fire burns. And maybe to some people may not be pleasant. Alright? The fire of the Lord is not my word. So the word of the Lord is equal to fire, and it may not be pleasant to listen to. And it may have even a burning sensation in the heart of certain people who have been taught a certain way. And so is not my word like as a fire? So you see the allegory to a burning sensation to some people, saith the Lord. And like a hammer, there we go, that breaketh the rock in pieces. Now we'll take a look at the rock in a minute. Alright, and where we find that rock and how it leads us to other many important allegories in our studies. But the hammer, we see the globe shaking right now, but if you take a rock, you take a hammer and you start beating on a false foundation. So you picture our world founded on a false foundation, which is a rock that is going to be broke into pieces, it says. And like a hammer that breaketh the rock in pieces. So you get the allegory to the hammer of the Lord and the word of the Lord like fire, but the hammer is going to break out the rock, which is the false foundation that we're founded upon. Now, this is actually going to link us to Daniel chapter 2. Alright? And that false image of an idol, and God speaks of the hammer in the negative term, in the negative way, when God is talking about the idols that have been fashioned by the hammer of these men, okay, and established. So we'll go to the false idols And the image that we're going to look at in a very large sense here, which is the idol that Nebuchadnezzar had made, which was of a king and of a man, and that everyone would bow to this idol as Lord and God of the kingdom. And so what do we see there concerning the rock in the book of Daniel? Well, we see a rock coming down that's been cut out without hands. It represents the Spirit of the Lord that smashes the 10 toes of this false image of a king and a man as your God. This is truly what the allegory is too. And that rock then fills the earth, all right? And that rock that fills the earth, of course, is Zion, or Israel, and it is these daughters. And the reason why it's 10 toes is because it's actually pointing you to the 10 northern tribes of Israel. The southern kingdom, of course, was called Judah. And Judah represents the male, and Israel represents the female, as we come to understand in our studies. And we know that the way that you claim to be an Israelite was through your mother, it was not through your father. And we know that together these two nations, which are supposed to really be joined as one, the male and the female in the covenant of righteousness, a righteous covenant, represented what was called the woman's seed. All right? And so that's why you see the 10 toes on this false image of a king and a ruler as your Lord, your Master, your God. It's really an image of Baal, all right? Which is spoken of all in Jeremiah 23 with your false dreamers. Now, the hammer, we know, built and fashioned a lying idol. And the world is full of this lying idol of a man as your God. Over 4.4 billion people bow their knee to an idol of a man. And you can say this has not led to the downfall of our world. It absolutely has. It's come down to the yoking of women under man-made law, religious law. This idol of a male that over 4.4 billion in total bow to, it combines the Catholic, it combines the Christian, and of course then you have the Islamic faith. They too bow to a man. It may be a little different, but they bow to a male idol. And so you have over half of the world's population bowing to a false image. And so the rock that actually smashes the idol down, that false idol in Daniel 2, then grows and becomes a mountain. And you find that mountain actually in Zechariah 4 as the capstone, which is actually going to be your ruling mountain of the world. And the capstone there is feminine. It's feminine for a reason. It represents the daughter of Zion. Heifer, the heifer represents Israel. And the she-goat, these are all in the Abrahamic covenant in Genesis 15:9. And they are promised full restoration back to their rightful place as the ruling spirit of this world, whose man's original covenant was supposed to be with. You find that in Malachi 2. And it says, yet is she the wife of the covenant of your youth, the wife of your covenant. The original one, the only one, really. Before you chose to marry a harlot spirit, which was Jezebel, as we discovered, which is actually Baal exalts, that's the meaning of Jezebel. And then you'll find him, the wife that he married in Isaiah 54, as Baal. And that's pointing you back to who he exalts in his heart, which is the Jezebel spirit that'll then exalt him as your image of a god. And that's what that all points us to. So, but where else does the rock actually lead us to? The rock actually leads us to, and I'm going to connect it here in a minute. Let me just look at some of my passages. Okay. and just briefly on the king. Hosea 13, verse 9 says, O Israel, thou hast destroyed thyself, but in me is thine help. Well, when you get looking at the word azir, which is your help, it is applied to God 20 times, I believe, or 21 times. And the only other time that azir, as your great help or helper, it's applied to the woman in her creation account 2 times as your helper. And these are the only times that it's used. Now they want to put it a masculine noun. And of course the men of Baal wants to do that. But your azir, your great help, is she, the daughter Zion, whom no man sought after. She became the outcast spirit, the original spirit of his covenant with his wife. And it says, I will lay out your tents, I will spread out your tents. And she promises her daughters that they will not only be the original seed of Israel, because what makes you the original seed of Israel is the law that you are teaching. And that law had absolutely no violence or bloodshed found within it. But here it says, O Israel, thou hast destroyed thyself, but in me is thine help. I will be thy king. No, they didn't want a queen, they wanted a king. So this is obviously a complete fallacy made up by Baal. I will be thy queen. That's who ruled them. And she is promised as the stronghold of Judah. And this is the daughter Zion in Micah chapter 4, I think, or 5. And she is promised the dominion to be restored back to her. And that takes you to Isaiah 54. I will spread out your tents. And which takes you back to Isaiah 49. You will not only be a light unto the Israelites, you will be a light unto the Gentiles. So she's promised to claim them all. Her spirit of the original covenant, known as these daughters, gave in covenant. Again, Job 31 says he made a covenant with his eyes. Why then should I think upon a maid? For what portion of God is there from above? And that's representing these daughters that were gave in covenant to teach mankind the laws of heaven. And she is considered his covering and his protection. And without her, we cannot cast a cord for a lot in the congregation of the Lord. Now, I'm going to keep on here in a minute. The rock here, she says, I will be thy queen. Where is any other that may save thee in all thy cities? And thy judges of whom thou shouldst give me a king and princess. So, if it was a king already ruling them, why did they change and say, give me a king and princess? They already had a king. And you could say, well, no, the king wasn't good enough, was this and that. No, it was a queen. That's where Israel drew their power from, was from the queen daughters of Zion, who was gave as their covering that could actually cast a cord or a cord for lots in the congregation of the Lord, which is situated in the north, told us in Isaiah 14. And we know that that's in Lebanon because it tells us your living waters flowed from Lebanon. That links us to the house in the forest of Lebanon. And that links us back to what Solomon was doing, to the gates. Okay, so the hammer, I want it to link back to the gates in New Jerusalem. And we'll do that in 1 second here. Therefore, where does she say? Give me a king and princess. And I gave thee a king in mine anger and took him away in my wrath. And that you also see backed up further in Psalm 110, verse 5, when the Lord that sits to this Lord, which is supposed to be the priest after the order of Melchizedek, so that's Christ's number 113, sitting here, and to his right sits the Lord 136. And she will strike through kings in the day of her wrath. And the one that sends the rod of his strength is Mother, who is 3068. So you get 3 Lord's numbers in Genesis 1:10. Now, they'll say Christ is going to strike through. And they show these mighty pictures of, again, of an idol of a man mighty, getting ready to strike through. No, Mother God, 3068, who is creator and Lord of all, sends the strength of his rod, which is the key of David, the government of God, upon this earth. And the way earth is ruled is through Mother God's Spirit, but is exalted by this man here after the order of Melchizedek. And they all have three very distinct numbers, 3068, 113, and 136. And we know these are three distinct lords, not just different names gave to the same Lord, because of the passage in Genesis 18, when Abraham sees three lords standing. They have it translated angels or men. And it's these exact same three numbers that he encounters. All right? So we have established that. And the rod out of Zion is the daughter of Zion. We have discussed how she will stand up and take back her throne that was always hers. And Mother God says to the daughter of Babylon, come down, there is no throne for you. Oh, you think you're the queen of the kingdom because man exalted you in his heart, the harlot in his heart. Why? So he could make this false idol of a man as God. And the harlot builds him up. That's the Baal, the wife of his marriage in Isaiah 54. Yet more are the children of the desolate woman who was the camp of Mahanaim. All right? Where Jacob actually battled the presence or the angel of the Lord. And we know he named them the Mahanaim, and then they are identified as the same camp, this twofold army, the 144,000. Christ tells us, know ye not, I could call for more than one army, and we know that's 72,000. There's 6,000, which is a league, and there's 12 leagues, and that was one army, 72,000. So as it were, the Shulamite, as it has the company, as it were, of two armies, it says. And that army that she has there is the Mahanaim, that Jacob names after he sees them coming up and down amongst, actually, in the stones of fire is what they're doing. And we already spoke on the stones of fire in another video, so that part I'm not going to bring into it. But with the stone, it says in Deuteronomy, okay, 32 verse 18, it says of the rock. Now we've got the rock here. Now we had the false foundation that the word of the Lord is like fire, and the hammer, and trust me, when that hammer strikes, this globe's gonna shake really, really hard. It's really gonna shake. And it's doing it now, but not like what it's gonna do when that hammer really comes down. But it says of the rock, there's the rock, that begat thee, that gave life to you. You are unmindful, and you have forgotten the God that formed thee. This is writhed in pain. This has to do with patriation. I can't say the word. Am I saying it right? I actually have to look at it. Patrition, which is to give birth to a child. Now that is not a father, and it means to writhe in pain and to travail to bring forth life in the birthing process. A father does not do this. This is the rock where your living waters are to come from. And you see those living waters coming from Lebanon, which is actually the congregation of the Lord in the north, who met in the house in the forest of Lebanon, that then we actually see Solomon daubing up the breaches in David his father. Why does he do this? Well, let's look at something else here. All right? Let's look at Revelation 21:21. And we're going to just suppose something after we read this passage, okay? So we can keep you up to speed here. So Revelations And what seems to come into question with a lot of people is, where did those 24 elders all of a sudden pop up in Revelations 4:4 when there's absolutely seems to be little to no mention of them? Well, they may be in the priests that you find in the rotations. I believe there's 24 and whatnot. But outside of that, most people's like, well, what does those 24 elders mean? Well, let's read Revelation 21:21, and it says, and the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Excuse me. Okay, so we have 12 gates. Pearls. And what else does it say? Every several gate was of one pearl. So what's several mean? Well, 3, generally. That's our number. So if you got 12 gates and every third gate was a pearl, what's 12 times 3? 12 times 3, guess what? We got 36 gates, not 12. Now, this is the question we ask. 36 minus 12, we have 24. What under the sun is those 24 gates there for? What are they there for? Wow! Let's take a look at, again, the hammer that's going to beat out the false foundation. Alright? And the false foundation is the harlot spirit that man exalts in his heart, that exalts him as God through these false images of a male as your God and your ruler. And God says, I will remove the name of Baal out of your mouth. Baal is a name for your husband who wants to be your Lord and Master. And in Hosea 2, it's actually mother speaking. It's not no father, it's mother speaking. She says, I will remove the name of Baal out of your mouth. He is not your Lord and your Master. He is your husband. End of story. She doesn't say, well, as husband, that puts him in charge of you. No, that's what leads to all this sexual immorality and all the debasement of the woman, that a man has power over a woman's body. A man does not have power over a woman's body and to tell her she has a right to do this and to do that. That's the yoke of the law, of the man-made law upon her neck. Her power gets restrained under his man-made laws. And it did so when man chose a covenant with the harlot as opposed to the wife of his youth, which you find in Malachi 2 and then in Galatians 4, as these two women are an allegory to two covenants. And one was Hagar, who with her children are under the bondage of the law. And one, represented by Sarah, came from above to free you with her law, which were laws of fairness, truth, and equity. And it says, they are not valiant for the truth upon this earth. And it says, truth staggered in the streets and it fell. When man began to exalt this harlot in his heart, the hosts, meaning the children, were handed over to him. And that is why you see the Shulamite in Song of Songs 1:6 saying, look not upon me because I am black, because my mother's sons were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyard, but my own I have neglected. Now we came to understand that to be black in the scriptures meant to be without the doctrines of truth. And yet later on in a later chapter of Song of Songs, we see the Shulamite shining like the sun, fair as the moon, and terrible as an army of banners. These are your daughters as the hammer of the Lord, with the fire of the truth of heaven that just burns in the heart of men to hear it. Oh, we don't get our law from her. She's the wife of your original covenant, not the harlot you exalt in your heart so you can write your own laws and yoke her under you and tell you you're in charge of her and whatever she thinks and what she can do. That's not God. That never was God. And so we come back to these gates and to the daubing, actually, of the breaches in the wall of David, his father. This was Solomon who did this, okay? And so this leads us actually to the key of David and the denial of the righteous spirit, her right to pass back and forth through the gates. These 24, I'm going to speculate that Solomon had daubed up. And we are told that he changed the portion in the midst. And the reason he does that is so that he can teach his own man-made law and yoke her under him. And we are told he tore down the houses. All right, we're told this in Micah 2. We're told it in 1 Kings 11. And, okay, so I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so Micah 2, what does it say? And I said, here I pray you. This is Micah 3. Where's my Micah 2? Right here, sorry. I'm being shadowed by the computer. So we know that there was 36 gates in the New Jerusalem. And we know that these same elders, 24, God calls Israel the servants of the Lord. So it's really these 144,000 daughters of Zion holding no guile in their mouth. They're reborn upon the earth. They're actually promised to be reborn upon this earth in passages like Isaiah 29 and Isaiah 30 when you carry it over and read it through and understand what's being said there. That the Spirit will be reborn as promised by Mother God when she says, I'll not only cause you to be a light unto your own, which is Israel, as the seed identified in Isaiah 54, that will inherit the Gentiles, where she promises she will inherit the Gentiles and she will be the light unto the entire world. In Isaiah 49, and she said, you will clothe them on thee as a bride doeth, you will clothe them all. And it was a promise from her mother. She says, I spread out the heavens for myself like a tent, like I spread them out for myself. That means her children are spread out there. They receive her doctrines of truth. There is no laws of violence imputed in God's laws. We see this in various passages when we really want to go in and study it. And we see it here. Though they offer sacrifices as gifts unto me, and though they eat the meat, the Lord is not pleased with them. Now she will remember their wickedness and punish their sins, and they will return to Egypt. And what does she say? Hosea 8, verse 12, she says, though I wrote for them the great things of my law, they regarded them as something strange. That's the daughter of a strange God that he marries in Malachi 2. And why does he marry this Jezebel spirit that we love to speak on so much? Well, you better not bring her down too hard, boys, or you bring yourself down. Because it's the Jezebel spirit that has male exalted as the image of God on this earth, which takes you back to Daniel chapter 2 as the false image that this rock, this stone cut out without hands, which is these daughters reborn as Mother God's hammer, and fire coming from their mouth, speaking words that just burns in his heart. And it says, though they murmur, they will learn the truth. They will learn the true doctrine. And so they married Jezebel, the daughter of a strange god, which actually is Baal, which tells you that Baal married a harlot, which was like marrying himself, because she would just submit and teach his doctrine and do what he wanted her to do and build his power base on earth. She gets exalted, and the host gets handed over to the harlot spirit, which is in essence handed over to him to teach it what he will. All right? That's what we see. And so 8:13, though I wrote for them the great things of my law, they regarded them as something strange. Though they offer sacrifices as gifts to me. Okay, so I said this a little reverse, but the strange was that there was no violence, it was equal, it was fair treatment, it was loving, it was kind, and it was strange to their brains because they they wanted to exalt themselves, and so they married the daughter of a strange god, and began to teach what they wanted, which then leads you to the abomination that maketh desolate. And so the abomination that maketh desolate is the what you would call the Antichrist spirit, which has been ruling on earth for thousands of years right now. It's not just in the end, it's been ruling here. And but it says, though they offer sacrifices as gift to me, and though they eat the meat, the Lord does not accept them. Now she will remember their iniquity and punish their sins. That's the Lord, 136, daughter Zion. And Psalm 110, they will return to Egypt. Israel has forgotten his maker. And he did. This takes us to Isaiah 29, where it says, you told the potter she had no power. A word for potter is Hebrew number 70. Now they won't tell you that's what it is there, but it means the birthing chair, the birthing stool, the one who forms the clay in her womb as the potter and as the life giver. And God says, you told the potter she had no power, and you turned everything upside down. Why do you think the occult world inverts the cross? They invert the head, known as the daughter of Zion. They invert her head right into the ground, and they tell you the potter has no power over the clay. It's the clay that is God and Lord of all. Really? He's the life giver? And yet it takes us back to the stone, and she says, you forgot the rock that writhed in pain and brought you forth in birth. It was no father, it was me. And she said, I did it alone. There was no strange God with me when I did it. And yet, you married the daughter of a strange God. I told you my truth of laws. I told you it was truth, fairness, love, equity, all of these wonderful things with no violence, and eternal life was offered to you, and you cast me down. You didn't want me. You told me I don't exist in the heavens, is what you told me. Well, this is the hammer reborn upon this earth to break down that false image of a man as your Lord and your God. And we get the shaping of the false image. But what's more, this ties into the Antichrist spirit. What does he say? In Daniel chapter 11, verse 37, he will show no regard for the gods of his fathers. All right, who was the gods of his father? Well, one simple verse is going to convey this to us. Now my pen ain't good. Okay, so it's in Job 31. We've looked at this. Verses 1 and 2, I made a covenant with mine eyes. Why then should I think upon a maid? For what portion of God is there from above? The Spirit is. And it was in the form of his wife of the original covenant, who Baal shot at. All right, Baal means Lord and Master. That's Hebrew 11:67, as your husband. And Baal made a covenant with Jezebel, who was known as El-Berith, the other half of his covenant. So it was Baal and El-Berith. And it was Baal, these male harlots who wanted to rule as gods, in covenant with El-Berith, these harlots who are willing to preach man as God, to the debasement of the righteous feminine who is her adversary, much like the men of Baal were Gideon and Elijah's adversary. These wicked women of Jezebel who teach us a man as God are our enemies, and they cause us to have a yoke put on our neck and our power restrained. And it states that he built himself up with thick clay under the law. Where does it say that? I believe it's in Amos. I hope I got the right chapter here. Let's see. I'm losing track. Okay, maybe it's Hosea. Just a second here. Let me locate it if I can. But it says he built himself up with thick clay. That means he empowered himself under his man-made law. That's what he did. And most people don't see this, but what it actually leads to is it physically leads to a weakening of us daughters, because you are now partaking of his law and of his lie and of his body. You are not partaking of Mother God, where our power and our strength and her law, which was to govern the nations and to give eternal life from, which made us mighty. All right? So it says he built himself up with thick clay, and now I can't find it. I thought I had it pulled up here. I don't see it. Let me see. Anyway, it should be here. I'll go down one more time here and see if I can locate it. I guess my computer acting up. Right there. It is. It's Habakkuk chapter 2 is where you're going to find that verse. And it says, shall not these take up a parable against him? These who? These daughters of Zion, which are mentioned again. And Romans chapter 11, as your first fruits, that would be your 144,000 daughters of Zion, or daughters of Israel, known as the camp of Mahanaim, that became the outcast that no man sought after. And because of that, the Lord God says, I will put a boundary here, and you will not pass it. Your proud waves will not pass this boundary, and you will not enter into my holy congregation to cast a lot. You will not, because you exalt the harlot in your hearts, and as such, none will cast a cord in my congregation. I set a boundary. I set a boundary, and until that changes, I'll receive none of you. You get it? So, shall not all of these, Romans 11, if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world. So we see why they were cast off, to reconcile the nations back. What shall the receiving of them be but life from the dead? We're talking about these daughters, the camp of Mahanaim, who became the outcast that no man sought after, which is called the daughter of Zion. But we know her waters flowed from Lebanon. She originally came from Lebanon. She passed through the gate of David, which became these breaches that Solomon determined to wall up and replace the portion of Basra in the midst with a harlot spirit that would teach his laws. And so you see that as the key of David, that passing back and forth of these righteous daughters who were denied their rightful birthright, because birthright belongs to the daughters, which came from the north. And so they were established there according to this. And so it says a taunting proverb against him. That's these daughters that's going to raise up as the hammer and smash out the false foundation and raise up a taunting proverb against him and say, woe to him that increases that which is not his. He stole their riches. He took what did not belong to him by writing laws that yokes her power and strength under it, and say she's under him and must do what he tells her. Woe to him that increases that which is not his. How long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay. He empowers himself through the law. That's what it's telling you. He protects himself by thickening himself with lies. That takes us back to the whitewashed wall of Adam, who daubs it over, which we see King Solomon doing. All right? And then again, links us all back to Joseph's blessing, who is the birthright holder, supposedly, in Genesis 49, 23, 24. And it says, the archers, oh no, that's the men of Baal, because that's the same word there, 1167. The archers have sorely grieved her, not him, and shot at her the branches as they passed over the gates, or the wall, it says. The wall. What wall? The wall that Solomon daubed over. Possibly these 24 gates that we see and mention in Revelations, they were probably the servants' gates. That's probably what they were. And Israel is called the servant of the Lord. And the Lord is saying, until these return on high to me, as what man exalts in his heart, man will not receive my law or be able to cast a cord by lots in my congregation. And she states that in so many words for anybody with any understanding in Micah 2. Let's read it. Woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds. When the morning is light, they practice it because it is in the power of their hand. Whose power we're talking about here? We're actually talking about Solomon's power here, because we link it back to 1 Kings chapter 11 and to what he was doing. And we'll get to the wailing women too that Jeremiah is told to call for. But it was Solomon here, right? That was, now I was heading somewhere else here. Can I remember? I didn't finish Daniel 11 either. But it says, shall they not rise up suddenly that shall bite thee, and awake that shall vex thee, and thou shalt be for booties unto them? Because thou hast spoilt many nations, all the remnant of the people shall spoil thee, because of men's blood, and for the violence of the land of the city, and of all that dwell therein. Woe to him that coveteth an evil covetousness to his house, that he may set his nest on high. Who set his nest on high? Baal did. And how did Baal do it? He exalted the Jezebel spirit who would exalt him on high. That's how it happened. Then he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of evil. Nope. Mother God says in Isaiah 28, you made a covenant with death, and now you're going to have to pay up. And what that actually means is the promise that these daughters, in the symbol of the cutting away of the foreskin, which means the foreskin represented a covenant with the harlot Jezebel that would allow man to write his own laws. And Mother says, any who will not receive of the spirit of the original covenant, which you see in Psalm 110, that she will strike through kings in the day of her wrath. By striking through the kings in the day of her wrath, she's striking through the Jezebel spirit that he exalts in his heart to take him down. And so where was I heading? Okay, so it's hard to keep track of all the thoughts that you got to weave together, which is also found in Jeremiah 23, where we began. And it says, therefore, behold, I am against the prophets, saith the Lord, that steal my words, every one from his neighbor. That's in Jeremiah 23:30. And they weren't stealing, they were just handing it off. And they were prophesying, and they were saying, the burden of the Lord, the burden of the Lord. That's a reference to the children and to the mother God that, well, she couldn't really deliver the children. But she can deliver the children, but she promises these men of Baal, whose covenant is with the harlot spirit, who began to prophesy a lie, and they began to come together and weave it together, and it becomes weaved over as a dark covering over our entire world, where they can no longer see and even begin to reason out the truth. And so they come together and they hand off these lies one to another until it becomes weaved. All right? But Mother says, but as much weaving as you do with your lies, you can't weave together yourself a body that'll live. You can't do it. And she says, don't worry about the children being a burden to me. You read Jeremiah 23, she says, you'll be no burden to me because I won't deliver you. And that's the cutting away of the foreskin by these daughters, who actually appear as lionesses. And she appears with the dew in her mouth, and it says none can save when she determines to cut you away. And so because their covenant required blood, they have to pay in full with blood, which means that they will be cut away, as in the foreskin that they have in covenant, that foreskin representing the covenant of the harlot spirit. And it's done by the 8th day. The millennial reign, that 1,000 years that takes us to the 8th day, looks like it's the millennial reign of the key of David, the government of God upon this earth. And that 1,000 years is used to do that cutting away of that foreskin that is completely cut away by the 8th day, and your new day is dawning with truth, which takes you to the Shulamite, who is seen shining bright as the sun, clear as the moon, and terrible as an army of banners, and having no guile in her mouth, of the harlot spirit and of fallen Adam, Baal. And so again, we'll go back to Micah 2, and we'll talk about that for a minute. And it says, woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds. When the morning is light, they practice it, because it is in the power of their hands. Now, anybody who wants to know what this was all about, you'll have to go in and go back, track to, I believe I've got one there that actually has the house in the forest of Lebanon right in it. We know your living waters come from your wife, spoken of in Proverbs 5, and Song of Songs 4:12, and that those living waters flow from Lebanon, and Song of Songs 4:15, amongst many other passages. They are told to spring from Lebanon, which was in the north kingdom, which was the 10 northern tribes that would pass through, I think, these 24 gates as a servant of the Lord. And she was called the spirit of the covenant, which is why Job says what he says in Job 31. And man cast her down, didn't want nothing to do with her. And you actually see Jacob stealing her birthright from her when he wrestles her all night, and she ends up hamstringing him. And she actually warns Jacob. She says, I'm going to deal with you. And I can't remember. I had the passage pulled up here. Anyway, it is in there. She singles out Jacob, and she says, I'm going to deal with you. And she tells him how she's going to deal with him. And because the birthright belonged to the women of Israel. And the presence of God on this earth were identified as a congregation of the Lord, which was a congregation of women that we identified in Psalm 68. And the Lord's number there that lies as a heap of ashes and rises as a dove with her wings covered in silver in gold is 136. And she says, awake, awake out of your sleep. That means out of your spiritual sleep. And this Lord awakens. And when she awakes, she is awakened as if she is a drunken warrior. And she is angered by their false image. And the image there is indeed a male image. And then you get a passage where David says, I will delight in thy image. I will delight in. And the image there is female. You see, David was in love with the daughter of Zion. He exalted her. He thought her land, there was no land more pleasant than her to him and to his soul and to his spirit. And so she was the spirit of his covenant, and he loved her and he exalted her, and she was his key of David. And you see the men of Baal again in Joseph's blessings, shooting at these branches, these daughters who had passed over. They had to pass over. They resort to passing over it because Solomon is seen daubing them up in these various passages, which we find here in Micah 2. We'll get to it again in a minute. And you also see the key of David and everything that Solomon was doing in Isaiah 22, if you want to link that. And we see this mighty army actually in Joel chapter 2. It's not men. This mighty army is daughter Zion's army. 136 is her number. And she is the Lord's army. She's this mighty army. And they will climb over the wall. And every one of them will know their rank and their order. And that rank and order is seen in the behemoth as the bones that causes the great body of Israel to stand. And she is identified as a heifer in the Genesis 15:9 covenant, the only one where animals are split in the midst. But have you believe calf in Jeremiah chapter 3 or 4, it's one of those chapters, that the calf that was split in the midst, that was representing the covenant of man with God, was male. No, there's only one covenant mentioned in the entire Bible where a cow, a heifer, is split in the midst. It is not a bull. And God is showing you the symbol of two covenants with the two sides here, and walking up and down in the midst and promising restoration of the original covenant to first Israel and then to the she-goat, who is represented as your rightful rulers. Are called daughters of Zion in Song of Songs. The Shulamite shepherds a little flock of she-goats, which is then identified as the camp of Mahanaim. They're also called your strong one. Azaz means actually a she-goat. She's powerful, she's strong, she's the Azazel that bore the sins, the twofold sins upon her head. She was cast out into a land not inhabited. That was the fulfilling actually of the promise by Mother God in Isaiah 49, where she promised them, you'll not only inhabit the Israelites, you'll inhabit the Gentiles as well, and they'll be yours. And it says, Jerusalem, Israel, tell her warfare is ended, that she has borne double for her sins. And she is told that in Isaiah chapter 40. It does not say a man bore her sins. She has carried the sins on this world by wearing the yoke on her neck that caused man to be exalted and put her under bondage of him. And so she has borne her sins. God says, I never required a blood sacrifice of you. That came under your own law. And because of it now, we will fulfill your covenant and shed blood, as in the cutting away of the foreskin, and receive back those that will cast a cord for a lot in the congregation of the Lord. Micah 2. And they covet fields. This is Micah 2. And they take them by violence. This is what Solomon was doing. And houses, and take them away. So they oppress a woman, not a man. And his house, even a woman, and her heritage, her birthright, which is what they were doing in 1 Kings chapter 11. Therefore thus saith the Lord, behold, against this family do I devise an evil, from which ye shall not remove your necks. Neither shall ye go haughtily, for this time is evil. In that day shall one take up a parable against you and lament. This is who lamenting? This is Jeremiah, which is going to take us to the passages in Jeremiah chapter, what do I got pulled up here? 2, 6, and 8. And we're going to get there in a minute. Where is it? I just had it here. And, yeah, I'm right there. Jeremiah 9 we'll look at. But you'll find, yeah, we're going to go to there in a minute. And so the one lamenting with a doleful lamentation and say, we be utterly spoiled. The he here is Solomon, hath changed the portion of my people. And this is Jeremiah lamenting, but the spiritual overview on this is the daughter Zion herself lamenting her loss of her daughters that she inhabited. They were her pleasant land. And she says, you divided my pleasant land. And that division came in the form of two covenants that you see in Galatians 4 as two women. One under bondage of Baal and his man-made laws, which says a woman is under a man and yokes all of her children under those laws as well. And the other one, Sarah, who came from above, frees you with her law. But these two covenants brings you back to the day of the Lord and the controversy of Zion and the splitting of the pleasant land, which was her inheritance to indwell with her spirit. And so she became very mad at these men who split the pleasant land. And a lamentation, how spoiled he hath changed the portion of my people, how hath he removed it from me? Turning away, he hath divided our fields. And this is what he was doing in 1 Kings 11, which goes along with him tearing down the houses, which is what he was doing. He says, and they covet fields, and they take them by violence, and houses, and take them away. So they oppress a woman and her house, which is what the law that man wrote was designed to do, to yoke us. And they use a violence to perpetuate that. Blood does not wash you. It is the water that washes you. Christ was pointing you to the Holy Spirit that cleansed him. He was a sepulcher was hewn out of stone. And it was showing you that Christ was cut from his mother, meaning he taught her laws and her ways, and he exalted his sister and his mother. That was the key of David upon his shoulder, the government of God. And then in Isaiah 51, she says, those who seek after righteousness are cut from me. Know ye not the stone from whence you were hewn from? And that takes you back to Deuteronomy 32:18. You forgot the rock that begat you and writhed in pain to bring you forth. Me. You forgot about me. You cast me out is what you did. You did not want a covenant with me. And my covenant is the only one that will sustain you and give you eternal life. But you chose a covenant with Jezebel, the harlot spirit, so you could write your own laws and build yourself up with thick clay and debase your righteous sister under you until there was no longer any remembrance of her in the land. So, how had he removed it from me? Turning away, he had divided our fields. Therefore, thou shalt have none. This is the verse we want. I can't see the number. It's so pale. 10? I think it's verse 10. Micah 2:10. Therefore thou shalt have none that shall cast a cord by lot in the congregation of the Lord. Where was the congregation of the Lord? The congregation of the Lord was the congregation in the north, found in Isaiah 10. When the harlot and Baal said, I will be like the Most High. Right? And we know the living waters where your true life is found, your true word is found, comes from Lebanon. That's where they flowed from. And so God says, I placed a boundary. God says this in Job 38, verse 11. I set the boundary, and your proud waves will be stayed. I will not receive you into my congregation until you stop exalting the harlot spirit in your heart and thinking you're God on this earth. That's what God says. Okay. So we'll move along in Micah 2. We won't read all of it. There's one verse here I want. Okay. So we want the last two verses of Micah 2. Sorry, I can't see. It's too pale to see the numbers on them. But it's the last two verses of Micah 2. It says, I will surely assemble you, O Jacob. No, wrong. Israel. Israel is the woman's seed. You claim to be an Israelite through the woman's seed. You never claimed it through the men. They changed that all around, upside down. I will surely assemble, O Israel of thee. I will surely gather the remnant of Israel. I will put them together as the sheep of Bozrah. So they're going to be back into the midst of the body as the righteous spirit that rules. The dominion promised back to the daughter of Zion will be restored back to her. You want to know why Daniel was so puzzled by seeing the so-called Son of Man brought into the Ancient of Days? It was no son, it was the daughter, the only begotten daughter. And his face fell, he said, for many days. And so they will be put together as the sheep of Bozrah, as the flock in the midst of their fold. They shall make great noise by reason of the multitude, it says, of men, of women. That's going to take you back to Zechariah chapter 4, where they're crying, grace, grace, unto it, unto the capstone restored, which is the daughter Zion and her spirit of the covenant. It says, the breaker is come up before them. They have broken up and have passed through the gate and are gone out by it. And their queen shall pass before them, and the Lord the head of them. The Lord there's mother, who promised the restoration. And she said, I spread out the heavens. So where else do we get the tearing down of these women's houses? Well, we get it when Jeremiah is told to call for the cunning women. Okay, and I'm going to check to make sure I'm still rolling here. Okay. And I'm soon going to have to wrap it up. But here in Jeremiah, this is what the Lord tells Jeremiah to do. He says, the Lord says, she says to him, call for your cunning women. It says, thus saith the Lord of hosts, this is Jeremiah 9, verse 17, thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider ye and call for the mourning women, that they may come and send for your cunning women, your wise women, that they may come. Your mourning women, it's your wise women anyway, and they're clever because they can write the lamentations that they know Mother God needs to hear from them. They can write the elegies that is required of them. These are very wise women, and they knew how to speak to Mother God. And let them make haste and take up a wailing for us, that our eyes may run down with tears and our eyelids may gush out with water. For a voice of wailing is heard out of Zion. And this is what they say. How are we spoiled? We are greatly confounded because we have forsaken the land, because our dwelling has cast us out. You see? This is the righteous spirit being cast out of her pleasant land as what would rule the world, the body. Man didn't want her. He wanted the Jezebel so he could exalt himself in his way in the heart, which leads to the abomination and maketh desolate. She'll have no children of her own. They'll be taught of his spirit, which is a spirit of violence, of hate, of degradation, and so many other things. And so, a voice of wailing is heard out of Zion. How are we spoiled? We are greatly confounded because we have forsaken the land, because our dwellings have cast us out. Yet hear the word of the Lord, O ye women, and let your ear receive the word of her mouth, and teach your daughters wailing, and every one her neighbor lamentations. Now, we see the vineyard stolen from the daughters of Zion, and hearkening to the words of Baal, your husband, and his teachings. Now, this actually leads us to, where is it? I'll have to pull it up here. In Thessalonians, right? Watch how this links us, this verse. And they say, peace, peace, when there is no peace. And this is what they're saying to the women here in Jeremiah 6, 8, and 9. They say this to them, and I believe in 1 or 2. They also say, just a second, let me see if I can find it here. And the men of Baal were also prophesying nothing but peace for the daughters in Jeremiah 23. But they're saying, it says, you have healed the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. This gets repeated, I believe, minimum 3 times. So it's pointing to you and indicating, or should be indicating to you, the importance of healing the hurt of the daughter. So it says, but have walked after the imaginations of their own heart, and after Balaam, which their fathers taught them. That's the strange God. But it says this in, what's the verse? Okay, it's not, I can't find it in that chapter. Let's see if it's in this one, because I'd like to read it right out. And it does so repeat it, I believe minimum 3, it might only be 2. But it says, let's see, I'll get to it, sorry. For they have healed, this is Jeremiah 8 verse 11, for they have healed the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly, saying, peace, peace. Where have we heard that before? When there is no peace. So what they do is they actually build up the image of a male as your life giver, as the one that's going to birth you home out. And it says, don't worry, they're prophesying nothing but peace for you, girls and guys. you exalt this image of a man as God who was actually crucified under Old Testament law. They shed his blood. When God says, I require no sacrifice of you, he would not exalt the harlot spirit in his heart. He exalted her. He pointed you to her, to the water that would give you life and restoration. That's what he did. That was his key of David. And that was supposed to be the testimony of Judah. Judah was to testify to his sister's law, who was the queen of the kingdom. And the woman, as the last thing created, shows you the glory on top. That's what she is. She's the glory that rules the kingdom with her spirit in the heart of man. But he didn't want that. And he becomes the abomination that maketh desolate, shall have no children, because he doesn't want to exalt the righteous spirit in her laws in his heart. He wants to exalt his own and the heart and make himself God. Do we not understand this? But here we say, for they have healed the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly, saying, peace, peace, when there was no peace. Were they ashamed when they had committed abominations? Nay, they were not ashamed, not at all, neither could they blush. Therefore shall they fall among them that fall in the time of their visitation. They shall be cast down, saith the Lord. What's the visitation about? The visitation is about the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is about the controversy of Zion. The controversy of Zion was about the splitting of the pleasant land into two covenants. The pleasant land is identified as woman in Galatians 4 as two covenants, and man chose one with the harlot that would exalt him as God, so he could write his own laws and yoke her under him. Now, where else does this lead us? This particular verse sounds so familiar. It leads us to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 3. For they shall say, for when they shall say, peace and safety, or peace, peace, when there is no peace, when they shall say this, what does it say? Then shall sudden destruction come upon them as what? As travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. You think it's a woman trying to deliver the children? Nope. We find who's trying to deliver the children under a man-made religious lie in Jeremiah 30, verse 6. Ask ye now and see whether a man does travail with child. Wherefore do I see every man with his hands on his loins as a woman in travail, and all faces turned into paleness. Turned into paleness means that the religious governments, or the governments of the world that have been built upon this religious lie, are coming down, and he is unable to deliver the children, or the Savior that they say is going to come and bring peace and take us all away. Christ's testimony was not to die on the cross, but they crucified him anyway under Old Testament law. And it was the Torah, it was the Pharisees who could not receive Christ exalting the righteous spirit within his heart or her laws. We know the laws that he testified to and lived on this earth are found in part in Isaiah 58 and Ezekiel 18 for anybody who wants to go look them up. He never ever fulfilled Old Testament law. That was not who his covenant was with. It would have meant him exalting himself, and he did not do that. He exalted his key of David, the government of God, the daughter of Zion, the living waters of Lebanon, which was the congregation that met in the north and then would bring these righteous decrees into the land wherein eternal life was established. And Christ pointed you to her. The blood now, because it is shed, must be shed in order to fulfill the covenant that they made with Jezebel, and she, the righteous daughters, must cut away that foreskin. And that's what that millennial reign is about. It is about the cutting away of the foreskin and those who will not receive the spirit of her covenant, and is testified to over and over and over again in the scriptures. I don't know how anybody can't see it. And the more you read, the more it becomes, it's just shining so brightly. I don't know how anybody can't see the truth. And so we know that the boundary has been set. It was set by Mother God in Job 38. And that is also the allegory that we see to Moses splitting the waters. It was a bitter water, is what it says. It's a bitter red water. It's a mixed admixture of doctrine. And the two must be split. The two covenants must be parted in order for us to be able to return back to the congregation of the Lord and to cast a lot for our children once again. And she's not going to receive that until we as daughters behave as the hammer and take out the false foundation. And hopefully the sons will wake up to this truth. Hopefully the daughters will wake up to this truth. This is the covenant. This has to be fully restored and established before we will be received into the heavens. And it's been testified to over and over and over again. And so there was one other thing I wanted to wrap up. We've been living under the Antichrist and his spirit. That's what these laws has been about. The Antichrist is Baal, and he exalts the harlot spirit that will exalt him and is yoked under his laws. And it says he will show no regard for the gods of his father, nor for the one desired by women, nor for any god, because he will magnify himself above them all, and in their place he will honor a god of fortresses, a god his fathers did not know, with gold, silver, precious stones, and riches. And he will attack the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god, and will greatly honor those who acknowledge him, making them rulers over many and distributing the land for a price. This sounds just like Solomon. It really does. And many of the kings who thought they were great and wanted to be exalted as gods on this earth. Nebuchadnezzar was one, though we know Mother cut his tree down and caused him to come to the understanding of the truth. And this sounds, like I say, just like Solomon, because go back to 1 Kings chapter 11. What did he do? He bought off Jeroboam and he gave him power. And Isaiah 22, he was attacking the house and the forest of Lebanon, but while having his own shields. The shields of the earth belongs to God. The shields of the earth is your covering, is your protection. And that comes through the righteous spirit. And she says, until you begin to exalt the truth in your heart, the righteous spirit, the host will not be handed over to the daughter of Zion, and you will not be allowed to cast a court in the congregation of the Lord for your children. I will not hear from you. And if you want to connect it further, you'll have to backtrack and watch some of the other videos. Most of the information is there. Psalm 118, the Lord is with me. She is my helper. I look in triumph on my enemies. It says, the Lord is on my side. I will not be afraid what man can do to me. What mortal man can do to me. The Lord is on my side. She is my helper. Helper is applied to the woman in her creation account twice, as well as being applied to God as your great help 21 times. Therefore I will look in triumph on those who hate me. Who do they hate? Well, they hate the righteous feminine and claim she don't even exist. And if she does, she certainly don't have no power. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in man. Absolutely. And that's what they've got. 4.4 billion of the world's population bowing down to the image of a hammered idol of a man as your God and your Lord and your King. That's a false image that the stone is going to take down and then become the mountain in the world and the capstone. And capstone there in Zechariah 4 is feminine. And so we have that, and we know that the Antichrist spirit is in total opposition to the women and what they desire, which is equality, fairness, truth, a loving God, a kind God. And we know that our Creator Mother is one who does not submit to briberies. We're told she doesn't take bribes. All are treated in the same manner with her. But when she has a dealing to take up, she does so. And she says to her righteous daughter on earth, she says just remember this. When you begin to testify against all of his lies that he has built up over time and he has hid in the dark why he did it, you understand this. I saw it all go down. I understand it, and I will be the witness to it all from beginning to end. So she says, I will take your part. I watched it go down, and I watched what he did. And I watched what the harlots did. So I didn't put this in Revelations 4:4. This is where you'll find